Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our next installment of the Fall 2021 Tennessee Master Beef Producer webinar series. My name is Justin Reinhardt. I'm an Extension Beef Cattle Specialist at the University of Tennessee Animal Science Department. I'm glad for you guys to be joining us again. I think many of you have already been through the process here several times, but like we do each time, I'll run through a few introductory comments before we introduce our speaker for tonight and get started with the actual presentation. So the first thing I'd like to let you know is that if you'd like to ask questions, if you'll use the Q&A question box, it should be at the bottom of your browser, should be at the bottom center of your browser. Here you see a screenshot of what that might look like. You can type your question in. I'll be watching those and moderating as Courtney speaks tonight, and try to answer as many of those as we can as we go along, or may just curate those and ask those live so we can address them directly to you in actual conversation rather than just typing in an answer. Also, you feel free to use the chat box if you'd like, and that's down there should be a similar place where the Q&A box is. If you have a technical question, that might be the better place to put that, a question about attendance or how to access other material, those kinds of things. But if you have a question about the material that Courtney will be covering this evening, the Q&A box would be the better place for that. We'll also have, I think, maybe one or two interactive questions. So this is an example of what that might look like. Courtney will start the polling question, and it'll pop up on your screen. And it may or may not show depending on the way that you're viewing this. So if you're viewing on certain platforms, you may not be able to see the interactive polling question, but don't worry about that if you don't see it. We just use this as a way to keep some interaction, to kind of see where you are as a group, and be able to tailor our comments directly to the feedback that we get from your answers to the poll question. So again, your attendance is actually kept by the follow-up survey that you get after these. So the polling questions, if you don't see it, don't worry about that. It'll be quite all right. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening. A lot of you know Courtney. A lot of you would know her as Courtney Carter, but as of about a month ago, is that right, Courtney? She's actually Courtney Bridges. So Courtney got married about a month ago, and we're certainly proud about that. We're very proud to have Courtney on staff here at UT Animal Science. She's a beef cattle programs coordinator. So that means that the way most of you would know her and have interacted with her so far is through the Tennessee Master Beef Producer Program. She makes sure all that runs correctly and does a lot of stuff behind the scenes that with the agents that you might not have seen. She stays really, really busy because even beyond that, she works very closely with our heifer development program and our bull development evaluation program. Been with us several years, and I guess 3 maybe years now. And since she's been here, she started working on a master's degree in reproductive physiology with me, and she's doing her research on application of estrus synchronization and time to AI, and actually doing 2 of those sequentially. So I won't go into all that, and she may be able to address that at some point this evening, but we actually, I'll say this, just got some data analyzed. She worked with our statistician to look at some data we saw today, and it looks really neat, really promising. So definitely, and I'm not saying this just because she's speaking tonight, but she's the best graduate student that I've worked with so far, and has done really good work, and certainly does a lot of things to keep our programs running that a lot of folks don't see. So we appreciate that, and appreciate Courtney being willing to come on here and present to you guys about reproductive management. And with that, Courtney, I will stop the slide share.
See if I can share mine. All right, how's that look?
That looks great.
Awesome. All right, so thanks for that introduction, Justin. I don't think I've ever heard you say so many nice things about me. I'm just kidding, but
that's all right. You'll pay for it later.
Yeah. But super excited to be on the other end of this tonight and be able to talk to you a little bit and present just a little bit about beef cattle reproduction, and hopefully give you some management strategies or tools that you can actually take back to your herd and and make some improvements if improvements need to be made. See if I can get this. Okay, so just some initial objectives, kind of so you know what to expect from tonight's webinar. So starting out, I'll discuss some reproductive anatomy of both cows and heifers, followed by physiology of the reproductive system, and then following that with some management strategies to improve some overall reproductive efficiency of your herd. And then I wanted to share some data from a field demo that we conducted. So a big part of our research program and my job is taking some of this reproductive research that we do and applying it to real production systems. So I've got some really cool data from a farm here in Columbia, Tennessee that I'll share with you today. Okay, so while we go through the anatomy, I'm going to throw a bunch of terms at you, but just try to keep in mind the function of the system as a whole, and that'll make it a lot more simplistic. So all in all, this is just a tube system used to get sperm and egg together, grow a calf, and then get that calf out, right? Get that live calf on the ground. And all of these sections or parts of this tube system have their own functions to make all of this possible. So here's a good schematic just showing that entire tube system, as well as some other anatomical features. And when I'm teaching this, I like to work from the outside in. So from the parts that are visible to the ones that you can't see. The first thing that's important to know is the reproductive tract lies directly beneath and parallel with the rectum. And this allows us to artificially inseminate cattle by palpating rectally and also use it for pregnancy diagnosis. Another thing to know is the environmental changes as you get closer to a structure called the cervix. It's less friendly to the sperm near the outside, and that's mainly due to urine and then some bacteria from manure, since we are right below that rectum. So that cervix is more friendly to sperm at the entrance, but even more so towards the end and into the uterus. But we're going to go through each of these parts separately. I just wanted to show you a schematic of them all together in the next few slides and talk about some functionality. So the first thing is the external genitalia, and that really serves as the first line of defense. It functions to keep as much bacteria as possible out of the tract and secrete urine from the bladder. This part can also serve as a calving indicator. The vulva will loosen and swell pretty tremendously before the initiation of calving. Immediately entering the external portion is the vagina, and its primary function is also a line of defense to kind of filter out more of that bacteria and debris that can get into the tract. And then the entrance to the urinary bladder is actually housed at the bottom of the vagina. So it really functions to secrete the urine. If you've learned AI or been around it at all, you'll notice that that would actually be the reason that we enter at an angle with an AI rod so that you don't accidentally hit the entrance to the bladder that you can see there at the bottom. And then these bottom schematics here are just to show you the difference in tissue as you get closer to the next structure, which is the cervix. And then just pointing out the location on this cadaver track of the vagina. So the cervix functions as the last line of defense before the uterus. And because of this, when a cow is not in heat, the cervix is really tightly closed and produces a very dense mucus. But when a cow is in heat, the cervix will loosen and produce more viscous mucus to help promote sperm transportation to be able to get fertilization and a calf. There are typically 3 rings in a cow's cervix, which I've shown here where you can visualize them better on this cadaver track that I actually cut open. But traditionally there's 3 rings, very distinctive, and they really just function to help as another line of defense, like we said, to protect that uterine environment where that calf is going to be housed. Okay. So moving right along to the next part of the tube system, and we get to the uterus. Cattle and mares both have what we call bicornuate uterus. And basically that just means that there are uterine horns. Cows are more distinctive when compared to mares. The mares have a much larger uterine body. And when I say uterine body, I'm talking about that portion right at the base before the horn split. I'd like to think of it as a Y shape. So the bottom portion of that Y would be the uterine body. And again, just showing that. And then I blew it up a little bit so you can see it a little bit better where those horns split off. Okay, so as you probably know, the main function of the uterus is maintaining pregnancy and accommodating the growing calf. So on the right, I'm showing these structures on the placenta of the fetus called cotyledons. And there are similar structures on the inside of a cow's uterus that are called caruncles. And basically what they do is they Velcro together. And that's how the nutrients are delivered to the fetus and waste is removed. And you might have seen this if you've seen a cow initially right after birth and she's expelled her placenta. Sometimes we call them buttons. So that would be what these buttons are, is the Velcroing to the uterus to transfer those nutrients back and forth to the calf. And then I wanted to show this image on the left. That's actually a pregnant uterus. So it's pretty crazy when we go back to that initial image we just saw of the uterine horns, just how large this uterus can grow to accommodate these calves. And this is probably only about 100, maybe 120 day fetus in there. So still got quite a ways to go. Okay, so after the uterus is the oviduct. The oviduct serves as kind of a connector between the uterus and the ovaries of the cow. And there are 3 sections to this part of the tube. The section closest to the ovary, which is kind of funnel shaped and wraps around the ovary to catch that egg when it's ovulated. And then the middle section is actually home to the site of fertilization. So fertilization or sperm meeting egg actually happens in this very small tube, which I always think is just mind-blowing. And then the third section that connects to the uterus, so that after fertilization happens, that fertilized egg can then make its way to the uterus where it will grow. An interesting thing to know is that once an egg's fertilized, it actually hangs out here in the oviduct for about 6 days before it leaves and works its way to the uterus to continue developing. Okay, so that was the oviduct. And then that brings us to the last portion of the tube system, which is the ovaries. The image on your left that you see right now is just a good little cross section of an ovary showing the different types of structures that can be found on them. 2 main structures that we're concerned with is this top image, which is called a dominant follicle. And then this bottom image, which is called a corpus luteum or CL. And I'll be talking a little bit more about the ovary and the related hormones in the next slides. But basically, this dominant follicle houses an egg and produces a hormone called estrogen. The CL forms after a follicle is ovulated and starts producing another hormone called progesterone or progestation hormone. And just as its name suggests, it's important in helping to maintain that establishing pregnancy. So fun fact here, when a heifer calf hits the ground, the day she is born, she has all of the eggs she will ever have in her ovaries. They do not continuously make them throughout their lifespan. So whatever she's born with is what she has. And they basically just hang out in kind of suspended animation until they're called to action or ready to start the wave to produce an actual dominant follicle and ovulate. Okay, and then just an aerial view of all the parts of this tube system we just discussed. Don't worry about all the terms here. I really just think it helps to wrap your brain around all of this if you see the track in different views. Okay, and one additional organ that we really don't think about that functions with the reproductive tract is the cow's brain. And the brain functions to send and receive various hormonal cues to help properly maintain her cycle. So we talked about CLs a little, and the hormone that they produce is progesterone. Well, progesterone gets into the cow's bloodstream and goes to a portion of her brain that makes another hormone to tell it, hey, we don't need to make this right now. I'm producing progesterone. I'm trying to establish a pregnancy. If I am pregnant, we don't need you to produce this other hormone. And then likewise, the estrogen produced by the dominant follicle also communicates with a portion of the brain to tell it to produce more of another hormone to actually initiate ovulation when estrogen levels are high enough. I always like to say here, we had a comment, this has been a couple years ago, but with the shift to BQA standards and given shots in the neck when compared to rump, we had a comment where an individual was like, well, I like to give it in the rump because then when we're talking about synchronization drugs, I like to give it in the rump because then it's right there by her tract and it's closer to where it works. And that's actually not the case because it works in the brain, right? Okay. And transitioning into the estrous cycle of a cow, we think of this as a period of time when the reproductive tract is being prepared for heat and the subsequent ovulation. So an average estrous cycle is said to be about 21 days, but that can really vary. I've seen some cattle routinely exhibit a 14-day cycle and some longer than 21 days. But in general, we say on average about 21 days. So on the right is a nice depiction of a cycle and how it relates to follicle growth and ovulation. So you have the recruitment of these follicles that continuously grow. And then there's a phase where a dominant or larger follicle is selected and continues to grow to ovulation size. And then ovulation occurs and the corpus luteum is established. That, of course, we now know starts producing progesterone to hopefully accommodate that pregnancy if a pregnancy was established for that ovulation. Okay, question 1. I might not do question 1, Justin, because I really don't know how to put it up there when I'm sharing my screen, but.
Okay, I wonder if I have the capability to do it.
I think I would have to stop share.
Okay.
Which I can.
It just, yeah, however you want to do it, it's fine with me.
Okay, so I'll just ask the question and I'll pause for a little bit and you think of what your answer would be. So my question here was, what hormone does the CL, the corpus luteum, produce? Your choices are estrogen, progesterone, prostaglandin, or luteolase. Okay, and we know that the CL produces progesterone, okay, progestation hormone. Okay, so now we're going to go through a complete estrous cycle of the cow. And a complete cycle is basically from one heat for estrus, which is labeled here, to another. So I'm going to go through and put a bunch of different stuff on the screen and talk through it with you to try to make it a little simpler and increase your understanding. So we said that an average cycle was 21 days, which is depicted here from ovulation to ovulation, which is the release of the egg. And after ovulation, we have the growth of a CL that starts producing progesterone to accommodate the pregnancy if one comes from that ovulation. The ovulation is depicted by that purple little wow symbol. So the blue line here is showing that progesterone concentration, which of course is in line with the CL growth and increasing as the CL grows and establishes. Okay, after ovulation and CL growth, we come to a part of the cycle called maternal recognition of pregnancy, which basically happens at about day 16 on average. And if a pregnancy was not established by that ovulation. So if she didn't get the hormonal cue saying, okay, we're pregnant, we need to keep this CL, another hormone is made that gets rid of that CL, lyses or kills the CL, so that progesterone concentration can go down. And that will allow her to be able to come back into heat so she can try again to get pregnant. Okay. And in order for her to come back into heat, when that progesterone concentration goes down, we have to have follicle growth, right? And this actually happens in waves. So while all this other stuff that we just talked about is going on, you also have follicles growing and then regression due to that progesterone from the CL not allowing them to get large enough to ovulate, but growing in waves along with this cycle. And as we said, the follicles produce that hormone called estrogen. So you can see it depicted here with the purple line. And the reason that it is so low is this presence of that hormone progesterone. Remember, we said it kind of doesn't allow the follicles to grow all the way to ovulation size. And that's because it really has a negative effect on this estrogen concentration. So this is just putting all these hormones together so you can see how they all work together. And while progesterone is high, we just said estrogen is low so that follicles cannot ovulate, because that progesterone is telling her, okay, we might be pregnant. We just ovulated. We need this progesterone to help maintain this pregnancy. But then at that maternal recognition of pregnancy, if she isn't pregnant, you'll see another hormone name, PG with the red line, is produced to lyse that CL so estrogen levels can rise and she can ovulate again. And putting it all together. Easy peasy, right? Okay, but why is this even important? Yes?
I was just gonna, I was thinking about looking at a couple of things on there, but I think you got it covered. So you can, we don't need to dwell on it. I actually can't even think of anything you didn't cover. So I just hopping in to help out if I needed to.
Okay. Okay. So why is this even important? Why does this even matter? And how does this help you on your operation? And perhaps one of the biggest ways is through better understanding of calving distribution and the economic impact that it can have on the operation. So this is 3 examples looking at 3 different breeding seasons using 3 cycles. So about a 60-day breeding season, if we look at about a 21-day cycle. And you'll notice all 3 of these examples got to a target of 90% preg rate, so a pretty good pregnancy rate overall. But there's various breedings in each cycle. So when we look at example 2, for instance, not a lot of cows bred in that first cycle, a little bit in the second, but then a big chunk in the third. And you'll see in the next few slides, we'll talk about this word called anestrus, or absence of cyclicity. And this example 2 is a pretty good example of that. And maybe these cows weren't ready going into the breeding season. Maybe they came out of winter a little thin. Maybe we didn't give them enough days off from the last pregnancy. They weren't far enough along postpartum. And so we just didn't get a lot of them bred this first or second cycle, but then they were ready by the third cycle. Opposite of that is example 3, where maybe we use some synchronization, or maybe our cows were just in really good shape and ready for the breeding season. And we got a big chunk of them bred that first cycle, a little bit the second, and there was just a few to clean up that third cycle. And again, all 3 of these get to the 90% preg rate. So why do we care? As long as they're getting pregnant, as long as we're getting a calf on the ground. And a big thing to look at is this average weaning weight, especially compared example 2 and example 3. I think down here has 1 and 3 compared. So comparing example 1 to 3, with the average cow herd size in Tennessee being about 30 cows, you're up about 540 pounds of weaning weight overall, just by making sure your cows were ready for breeding season or front loading that breeding season. So pretty substantial, especially when you're in the business to make money and selling pounds of calf. Okay, so let's put a dollar amount to this. And I like to point out that this is what we call repro math. So very simple, straightforward, to the point math. But if I take the average breeding season length, which we said is 21 days, estimate my weight of day of age to be about 2 pounds a day, gaining on those calves. If I have a $1.50 market price on a 500-pound, let's say steer, and I do some simple math, 21 days times two pounds, if my cow was bred in that first cycle compared to the next one, is about 42 pounds. And then I'm going to just multiply that 42 pounds by that $1.50 market price. And the cost of missing that one estrus cycle cost me about $63. So pretty substantial when you put a dollar amount on it, for sure. Okay, so how can we get there? How can we make sure that we're not missing an estrus cycle and that our cows are ready for breeding season? How can we get a more defined breeding season and subsequent calving season? And one effective way is by controlling what we call anestrus. And that's basically the lack of estrus or cyclicity in these cows or heifers. And this occurs in heifers before puberty. We call it pubertal anestrus. And in cows after calving, when they're going through a period of hormonal imbalance and what we call uterine involution, or time for that uterus to get back to the normal size that we saw. And this can really affect reproductive efficiency, definitely the length of the anestrus. And there's a lot of stuff that plays into and factors into this length of anestrus. So did she have difficulty calving? Is she in good nutritional plane? How old is she? And this is especially true for our pesky first calf heifers that just do not want to breed. You know, they're still growing and they're now accommodating a lactating calf. It could be due to genetics, due to health, and a big one, how many days is she postpartum? Like we just said, she's got that period of non-cyclicity after she has a calf, when she's trying to regulate back her hormone after that huge exposure to progesterone. Her uterus is trying to get back to a normal size. All of that. So a lot of factors that control postpartum anestrus and really play into its influence in how long it sticks around in the cow herd. Okay, so when we look at the influence of body condition on anestrus, this is some really good data just looking at the percent cycling at the start of a breeding season. So when you look at especially these 4.5 body condition scores compared to a 5.5, so just going up one body condition score increased your percent of cycling from 49% to 71%. So really effective tool to be able to make sure your cows are ready in the start of the breeding season by making sure that they're in good body condition, and definitely in an upward plane of nutrition, not going backwards. Okay, so same graph we just looked at, the 3 examples of our breeding season with our 90% preg rate. But now looking at average days postpartum the next season. So we just said that days postpartum really plays into this postpartum anestrus. So how can we make sure they have more days postpartum the next season so that we know that they're cycling before we're breeding and that they have higher fertility before we're gonna breed these girls. So again, looking at example 2 compared to example 3, you're looking at about 27 days average postpartum that next season for example 2, because our cows weren't ready going into the breeding season. Most of them got bred that 3rd cycle, when compared to example 3, where our cows had 51 days average that next season before they were expected to get bred. So that is a huge shift in fertility and calving percentage, just overall making sure that your days postpartum next season, really playing the long game with your reproductive management program. I wanted to show this. This is a new extension pub that Dr. Reinhardt and Dr. Griffith that y'all heard from a couple weeks ago did last year. And looking at the revenue and return of these expenses due to changes in calving distribution and weaning rate. So those numbers up top, the 50, 30, 20, that's basically saying that first number is saying the calves born in the first 30 days of the calving season. The second number is cows born from day 30 to 60. And that last number is 60 to 90. So you'll notice with a weaning rate of 92%, a calving distribution of 50% of them born in that first 30 days had a net return of about $99 per cow. So pretty substantial when we're talking about front load in that breeding season. Okay, but how does it work when we're looking at ways to manage this anestrus using tools that we have available? So this graph is showing progesterone concentrations post-calving in a cow. So the blue line with the peaks is just showing the amount of progesterone in her bloodstream after she calved, which would be day 0. And you'll see this real small peak right before we get to a larger peak. And what we call this is a short cycle, or it's that period after she has a calf that she's still trying to regulate her hormone concentrations, and she doesn't have enough estrogen available in her bloodstream due to that exposure to progesterone while she was pregnant to have an adequate cycle or have an adequate heat length. So we call this a short cycle. Very low fertility here. It'll most of the time be a silent heat, so she won't even stand. But the probability of you getting her pregnant on this are very, very low because your estrogen concentrations are not where they should be. She's not cycling like she should be, and that egg is just not going to be a very fertile egg. But the second cycle, she was able to have that little bit of exposure to progesterone, kind of kickstart her back into saying, okay, we're ready to have a normal cycle now. We're ready to rebreed. And then the second cycle would actually be normal fertility as we think of it. Okay, and then when we look at ways to manage that short cycle, we have a few tools that are available to do so. So we haven't talked a lot about it, but we have these things called CEDARs, which is a controlled intravaginal drug release mechanism. But it's basically coated with the hormone progesterone. And basically what you can do is use these CEDARs to help manage this anestrus or help these cows start cycling back and trick them into thinking they've had this short cycle, basically. So realizing the cycles, the postpartum anestrus, and then knowing that you have tools available to help manage that and help get to the calving distribution that we think of. And I wanted to point this out. These are just some AI protocols out of a Select Sires book. And what you'll see here is all of these have this CEDAR present in them. So have this little exposure to progesterone. And that's actually what we use to sync up these cows before breeding along with other hormones. So this short exposure to this progestin is a really tried and true method to synchronize cows and get cows back to breeding. But it doesn't just have to be for AI, right? We have this kind of relatively new protocol that we think of for synchronization of estrus for natural service. So basically what you do here is take a CEDAR that we just talked about, or MGA, which is a feedable form of progesterone that's only labeled for heifers. So we'll talk about CEDARs. You put a CEDAR in on day 1, which will be a Saturday. On day 7, so it stays in for 7 days, take it out on the next Saturday, and then you turn the bulls in. So real simple, CEDAR in, CEDAR out, 7 days. And that short exposure to progesterone, like we just talked about, is really going to work to push these cows up, which I'll show you some data on this in the next slide. Okay, so this is some data out of Kentucky. And they just looked at the difference in adding this short exposure to progesterone on some cows and how that they calved in the first 30 days. So you'll see the bottom to the control versus the cedar. Just adding that cedar for 7 days, average pushing up those cows, 80% compared to 45% calving in the first 30 days. So pretty substantial increase for just the use of a 7-day cedar. Okay, now I'm going to transition into the demo herd that I was talking about previously. So this is a herd that we went into. Her name's Reagan McFall here in Columbia, Tennessee. And she basically came to us and said, look, not much has been done with my cows. I want to see if I can make a living with these cows. Basically, right now we're calving year round, not a lot of management. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to go. So basically what we went in and did an initial assessment of the cow herd, just to kind of see where she was with pregnancy status, kind of age of the cows, how they were looking sound wise, teat structure, stuff like that. And made a plan, made a reproductive management plan, and established some goals of where she wanted to go with her operation. And from there, started implementing more and more management techniques year after year. The first year we started in 2019. I'll go ahead and show you the data for that. So this 2019 data you see here is just the initial pregnancy check data whenever we went in. And that's her percent calving in the first 60 days of that calving season. So after that calving season, we synced a good bit of her cows for natural service and bred a group of purchased heifers with artificial insemination. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But basically used real heavy sync for natural service. And just in 1 year, so the next pregnancy check, 2020, she had about 67% calving in 60 days. So pretty substantial difference there. But then we kept it up. And after that calving season in 2020 for that breeding season, we went in and she wanted to breed even more calves with AI. She saw how good those calves looked, made lots of little pretty Hereford Angus cross Baldy babies for her. So she wanted to breed more with AI. So went heavier on the AI in 2020, but then also still used that sync for natural service with the cedar for a group of older cows that she had at a farm that didn't have as good working facilities. So there's definitely options to mix and match, do both. You can do a lot of different combinations to get here, but at that 2021 preg check, it was predicted with ultrasound that 100% of those calves will be coming in 60 days. So just over those 2 years of synchronization, we were able to push her up to 60 days percent calving. And I'll show that a little bit better in this graph, looking at calving season length. So that blue line was the initial 2019 pregnancy check, and she was calving for about 180 days total. In 2020, we brought that down to 150 days total, with a bigger portion of them coming in 60 days, you'll remember. And then in 2021, brought it all the way down to 60 days. And I will just throw it out there that she took advantage of heavy culling initially. So that 2019 pregnancy check, when we went in, she went ahead and culled a lot of the older cows that were unsound, and a lot of the open cows. So that could account for that dramatic shift. But like I said, there's a lot of different combinations to get here. It might have taken an extra year, but she would have still gotten to the 60 days based on her strive to do it and to use all these different management tools that she has available. I don't know if I went too fast, Justin, but.
Oh, no, you left plenty of time for questions. That's the way I look at it. So, and from what I hear during the last one, Dr. Strick went plenty long, so we might actually get done a little early to try to make the balance. So I had a lot of good questions here, and I was frantically trying to type and answer those as we go, but I think a lot of them are worth just talking about, live here as we do a little Q&A. And if folks still have questions, please continue typing those in the Q&A box, and Courtney and I'll both look at those as we do some kind of live Q&A here. So one thing that popped up, somebody asked for to kind of go back and talk about the Sync for Natural Service in a little more detail. If you'll go back to that slide.
Yep. As soon as I figure out.
There are a couple of things I thought we could say about that. And I might have missed a little bit of what you said, but did you mention about, BSE on the bulls and mature bulls and that kind of thing?
No, I didn't. So a big part with this is, so just using a cedar or MGA isn't going to sync them up like it does whenever we use the other hormones and drugs that we use for artificial insemination. But it's very important to have a good BSE on your bulls and make sure that you're using a mature, proven bull, especially when you're using this Sync for Natural Service, because it is going to sync them up enough where he's going to have to work at least a little bit harder than if they weren't synced, but definitely not too hard to use it. But the important thing with this is making sure that your bull has a BSE and that you're just doing a cedar or MGA, not trying to use any of the other hormones and then turn bulls out, because they just will never be able to cover all the cows in that short of a time span.
Yeah, and that's the points that I always bring up with this. And, one thing to make very, very clear here, that this is very different than Sync for AI, for artificial insemination. We'll talk some more about that here in a minute. But you don't want to give any injections that you would normally give in a synchronization for AI protocol, because like Courtney just said, that'll sync them up too tight for the bull. Really what this does, it's not so much that it synchronizes the service that it can directly after that. It does that to some degree, but not so much that the bull can't cover them, but still need to make sure you have, a mature bull that can cover several cows in a day, that bull has a breeding soundness exam. And we can talk some more about BSEs, how that works, why you do it. If that comes up here as we go, there's a lot more. I keep looking over here at the Q&A box. There's a lot more questions.
I just saw someone asking about cow to bull ratio.
Yeah.
And with this study, they looked at bull to cow ratio of one bull to 23 cows and one bull to 42 cows. And they saw no difference in pregnancy percentage.
Is that at the bottom of the next slide? Go to the next one, see if that's, I think there might be a notation on that.
Yep.
Yeah, so these are some work that Les Anderson did. Most of these cows, we did some of them, and he and I both. So Les Anderson is a reproductive specialist at the University of Kentucky, and that's where I did part of my schooling. And so he and I worked together a lot since then. And so we put a lot of cows on this. You see there's several cows in all those treatment groups. But, the idea was to not have to change the bull to cow ratio. And he and I both have the opinion that a good bull that's passed, a mature bull that's passed the breeding soundness exam can probably do more than we usually say for the rule of thumb. So our rule of thumb on bull to cow ratio is usually, one bull per, so one cow or heifer per month of age of the bull up to a 3-year-old bull. So you don't want to go past 35 or 40 cows or heifers per bull. Even, if it's a 4-year-old bull, you don't want to go more than that. That's kind of the maximum capacity for a breeding season. But they can probably do a little bit more than that. We don't want to say that blanket across the board, because some bulls may not be able to. But here we didn't want to change the bull to cow ratio because, if you had to buy more bulls, that might offset the economic benefit of doing this. So, we kept the same bull to cow ratio in all the herds we worked with here. And still, you can see the increase the overall pregnancy rate. But again, as Courtney emphasized, even more importantly than that, it front loaded. And there was a question, what do you mean by front loading the breeding season? That's what Courtney's talking about, is that you have so many more of them born in the very first of the breeding season. And so if you do that, she showed that slide that means on the next breeding season, on average, your cows are further postpartum. So they've already had that time to recuperate, to start cycling back, to get over that postpartum anestrus that she described. But again, if you do this, and again, she pointed all this out, I'm just kind of re-chewing your cabbage there, Courtney, but the fact that you give a little bit of exposure to progesterone, it kind of mimics their natural short cycle. So you get that out of the way. Of course, the short cycle and that first ovulation after they had a calf or when it ever goes through puberty, it's not fertile. So you get that infertile kind of initial start out of the way, so that the next time they cycle, they have the opportunity to actually conceive and be safe in calf to that. And I'm going to take a little bit different route, just because I had a question come in before we started talking, asking about, does a cedar wear out a cow if you use them? And what made me think to say that is the fact that just mimics their natural short cycle. So a cedar, and I think there was a question about not understanding the cedar thing. So again, cedar stands for Controlled Intravaginal Drug Release Device. And I think you had a picture on that, one of the slides, didn't you, Courtney, of a cedar? And it's just it's kind of a plastic tee with a rubber coating on it. And the progesterone is impregnated into that rubber coating, or it's infused into that rubber coating on the device. And so when you put it in the vagina of the cow, and it's in contact with those mucosal membranes, that progesterone gets into their system that way. And so that it's the exact same hormone that they make naturally, and it's actually at lower levels than they naturally make. So you don't have to be concerned about it. The question was phrased, wear a cow out. It's not extreme to them. It doesn't, matter of fact, it's a more subtle exposure than they normally get to that. But it's enough to go ahead and, as we say, kickstart them, or to get that short cycle out of the way, restart them cycling, so that they conceive earlier in that next breeding season. So I think that covers several of those questions.
On that same line of thought, someone was asking about MGA and how it works.
Okay. And I see a question here too about who places the cedar, and it's a really simple procedure. When you purchase a bag of cedars, they come in bags. These are the only company that markets these is Zoetis, and they have I think maybe a patent on them or something. But anyway, right now Zoetis is the only place you can get a cedar. When you get those, you buy a little applicator, plastic applicator with it. You fold the cedar up, put it in an applicator, insert it in the cow. It's very easy to do. Just have to focus on cleanliness, and anybody can do that. As a matter of fact, you don't have to have a veterinary prescription to purchase the cedars. They're traded on the open market, so you can do that yourself. We have access to some videos to show you how to do it. If you need that, we can get those circulated. Matter of fact, maybe Courtney, as we're talking and answering some other questions, if you can find a link to that one that Les did that he has on YouTube, and put it in the chat, folks can click that if they want to learn more about how to put it in. Was there something else that you were going to talk about though, or you going to bring up a question? I can keep talking off these questions if you want me to.
Yeah, you're good. Going off of sync, a lot of people are asking about AI, how it works, cost per minute, who does AI.
Yeah. So maybe before we get to that, even a more important question here is somebody asked if there were any of your famous jokes tonight.
Yeah, I was trying to ignore it because being the presenter just really put a lot on me.
All right.
I couldn't.
Sorry, Bobby, but
I'll have 2 jokes next week.
Okay, good. Is next week our panel discussion?
Right.
Or is it next week or the week after?
Week after. No, it's next week.
Okay, good. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off of this. Sorry, I kind of got off track there. But so let's talk about artificial insemination. let's back up even before we do that. Did you do your analogy thing, Courtney, about the row crops and stuff, about why it's important to have a tight breeding and calving season?
You say you want me to?
Did you?
I didn't put it in here.
Go ahead and talk about how we think about that relative to other crops.
Yeah, so looking at it from a calf crop type perspective, if I'm going to go out in the field and I'm going to plant some corn, I'm not going to take the planter out there, make a couple rounds, plant a couple acres, park it for a couple weeks, go back out there, plant a couple more acres, park it again, and just keep up with that. I want to be able to plant the crop at the same time so I can harvest in the same time frame and sell those goods uniformly, right? That's how we think about crop production. And when we think about optimizing profits for commercial cow-calf beef production, we know that profits are more optimized and greater when we sell our calves on a market when they're more uniform in age, weight, and size. So it's the same type of scenario.
Good deal. Before I get into the sync and AI, I did see a couple other good questions here that kind of going back to the cedar or the synchronization for natural service. And I just see that Courtney posted the link for placing a cedar. Again, that's Les Anderson from the University of Kentucky. Is that the one you got? There's also one from Missouri that's a good one, but there's a couple of videos on out there and some of these things that we talk about, some of these procedures you can't really learn from a video, but this one is so simple that you can learn from a video. So on that, a couple of things. One question, very important question. I'm glad somebody asked it about how soon after a cow calves can you use a cedar for, and I'm going to say, I'll answer it in this case for synchronization for natural service with a cedar. And so my answer to that may be a little bit different, likely different than what you would hear from other folks or read in popular press. A lot of people say you need to have a 35 or 40 or 45 day voluntary waiting period after they calve before you synchronize them. And that, they're accurate in saying that. The reason they're asking or answering it in that way is because they're thinking about getting the highest pregnancy rate that they can to AI. And I'll answer it a different way even for AI, but for natural service, if it's 2 weeks past when the cow calved and she didn't have a hard calving, didn't have a retained placenta, so you expect her to be fully, they call it uterine involution after they calve, for the uterus to kind of go back to its normal size when they're not pregnant and everything start working right. As far as just the anatomy, that takes a couple of weeks. So what we're trying to affect with the synchronization for natural service is that hypothalamus pituitary axis that Courtney described earlier in her discussion, that that's where the progesterone is perceived. That's where the receptors for the progesterone is in the hypothalamus and to some degree in the pituitary, and that's where it acts to reset that timing. So that's what you're trying to get. So as long as the uterus is repaired, which usually is about 2 weeks after calving, if everything went normal, that's fine. You can use it as soon as 2 weeks after they calve. And we see that on average, it moves that cow up calving a month earlier the next year, even if you do it as early as 2 weeks after she calves. So that's pretty effective. That's worth doing, I think, for a $10 cedar. You guys are hearing from my dog. I've got a dog in here with me this evening, so sorry about that. But a $10 cedar, if you average moving a cow up a month and she's a month earlier the next year, and you don't have to worry about her getting late. There was a question about a good cow that runs a 14-day or a 14-month calving interval. I would say that makes her not a good cow to me, but I know what you're saying, maybe good genetics or whatever. If you're just looking at it from economics, you can't really catch up, or you can't effectively make money on a cow that has a longer than a 12-month calving interval. So we need to do some things like this to make sure they stay caught up. That also brings up a question about reusing seeders. I mentioned they're somewhere between $10 and $13, just depending on who you get them, where you get them at. And a lot of people will want to reuse those. If you put them in for 7 days, well, let me say first, I'm not a veterinarian. I have a PhD in reproductive physiology, so that's where the doctor thing comes from, for whatever that's worth. But me not being a veterinarian, I can't tell you to use something off label. So I would tell you to go by the label, but realize that we have synchronization protocols that require the seeder to be in there for 14 days. So there's at least 14 days worth of progesterone in those. So just kind of realize that. I kind of got to talking there for a while, Courtney. I don't know if I got off track where I started, or anything that you can think of on that discussion I need to go back and re-mention before we go on to some other questions.
I think you covered that fine. You went through MGA, right? I was typing for a little bit.
No, I didn't specifically talk about MGA. So MGA is a feed additive, and even a veterinarian can't tell you to use a feed additive off label. And the reason we don't use MGA very much now is because it used to be labeled for both cows and heifers, but now it's only labeled for heifers. So you won't be able to use MGA in your cows for natural service. Those data that we showed you earlier, it was actually labeled for cows at the time that we did that. And it's effective. It works. It's if you don't, have the capability of getting your cows up to work them through the chute and put a seeder in, take a seeder out. It works very good for that. You can still use it in your heifers for that. Still use it for sync protocols in your heifers. But just realize it's not labeled for cows. So MGA, it's not like a seeder where it's the exact hormone that the cow makes, but it's an analog of that. It attaches to the same receptor, so it acts like progesterone, and it's orally active as well. So it's kind of like in humans a birth control pill. Some of those aren't the actual hormone itself, but they act like it. So, all right. So we're going to go through some sync protocols.
Yeah. The question was basically, what is your recommendation on a sync protocol? What do you use?
Yeah,
cows or heifers?
Cows or heifers. You can take a stab at it, Courtney, if you want to, or I can do it either way.
Okay. Yeah. So it varies a little bit for cows and heifers. If you have the time to do it, we like the longer progestion protocols for heifers, meaning that 14-day seeder that's labeled for heifers, or something along that line. We use the 14-day seeder for heifers quite a bit. But honestly, what we use the most is that tried and true 7-day co-sync plus seeder that's labeled for both cows and heifers. And that's it right down here under the short-term protocols. But basically, the fact that it's the same for cows and heifers, nothing's changing besides the time of insemination. We use that quite a bit. But I will say we have started using a lot more of the new 7-7 protocol. And even though it's an extra shot of prostaglandin and another trip through the chute, we've had really good luck with it. And we seem to really like it. Someone asked about using it for embryo transfer. And honestly, what we've seen is it really syncs these cows up quite a bit. And I think it would be good for ET as well. What do you think, Justin?
Which one is that I was typing my email address in the chat box. So somebody asked about that.
That's a 7-7. And it's not labeled for heifers yet. They don't have enough data on it for heifers. But so there's just enough data backing it for use in cows. So that's important to know. Yeah,
so 7-7 works great in cows. I'd anticipate that we'll get it figured out on the timing to do it for heifers, but just not suggesting it yet. It's for embryo transfer, like you mentioned. That's one of the places that the 7-7 really shines. because it gets them so tight. It gives you, like, if your embryologist is there on a single day and you want to get more cows that are synced, at the same time, that have a good CL when they're there to transfer, that gets you more at that time because it groups them up. And it brings, going by the data that Jordan Thomas out of Missouri, he's the one that developed this and did the initial research with it. His data suggests that it actually brings more cows into standing estrus than some of the other protocols do. So, just as we're talking about synchronization and time to AI, I'll back up and just kind of add to what Courtney mentioned. The protocols that I prefer for cows are, well, I'll say that for a lot of years until the 7-7 came out, I just used the 7-day co-sync plus cedar. So that would be on cows on the left of your screen. If you look at fixed time AI, so it's the lower left quadrant, 7-day co-sync plus cedar. That's the protocol I use for time to AI and cows quite a bit. I think that's on the heifer side there, Courtney, but I like it on heifers as well. So the one for cows here, it's very repeatable, very consistent. I didn't have to worry about having a bust on that. I used a lot of these other ones in research and field trials, and over the years, that's just the one that's consistently given me the best results. Sometimes I may not get these big grand stories of getting 80% or something that you might with a couple of these others, but you also get some risk of getting a lot less than you normally would for 7-day co-sync plus cedar. So I just stayed with that. If you're going to check, eat, and breed, or check, eat, and breed for 72 hours and then clean up time to AI, I still, I prefer that, or for a lot of years have used the 7-day co-sync plus cedar. Now that the 7-7 is out, and we've used it on a few hundred cows, we'll keep using it on some more, but I feel pretty comfortable saying that if you want to go ahead and start using that, you won't be, you shouldn't get any surprises with that. You should be pleased with it. It requires one extra working, and it's a little bit longer protocol, but that's part of the benefit of it, is because it's a longer exposure to progesterone. So, and maybe back up and even just talk about why we use AI in cows, and realizing that a lot of you on this series are relatively new or brand new to cattle production. The reason we use artificial insemination, the reason it even began as a thing in cattle production, is because you can access genetics from bulls that you wouldn't normally be able to access. So, let's say you got a $50,000 valued bull standing in California. You're probably not going to be able to run that on your 35 commercial cows. If that's what our bull cow ratio is going to be, it just costs too much to do that per pregnancy. And that'll bring us to another discussion asking about the cost of it. But that originally was the big reason for using artificial insemination, was to access genetics you wouldn't be able to get otherwise, that you couldn't buy in a live service sire. To me now, the thing that is almost as beneficial as that is the exposure to this progestogen, this cedar that Courtney's talked a lot about, and the fact that keeps your cows grouped up really well for calving, breeding early and calving early in those situations. So those are both big benefits of using AI, especially if you're going to use a synchronization protocol that includes a cedar with that. So then the cost of it, you're talking about probably $6 per shot. Let's say, for ease of math, and averaging it out, the GnRH and prostaglandin will be a little bit different cost depending on what product you get. But let's say $5 a shot, and let's talk about 7-day co-sync plus cedar, just so we can talk about it on cost. So let's say you got $15 total on injections. You got a $10 cedar, so now we're at $25, right? Let's say you use a $25 straw of semen. So that's $50. And here's the important part. That's $50 per insemination. Okay. And you can't really just compare that. It's not really comparing apples to apples if I just say it's $50 to breed each cow, because if let's say we expect 60% pregnancy rate to a fixed timed AI, then that actually would be what, closer to a $70 something pregnancy. And that's the way I look at it, as cost per pregnancy rather than cost per insemination. And so if we say it that way, let's say it's a $70 cost per pregnancy, then you say, well, that's a lot cheaper just to put the bull in, right? Well, you got to realize bulls aren't free. And if you're using anywhere close to a good bull, anywhere close to what you can get with an AI bull, then that's at least a $5,000 bull. And if you can only run that bull with 35 cows a season, then the cost of pregnancy is probably going to be somewhere in that $50 range. So it's not like $70 to AI versus free pregnancies. It's $70 per AI pregnancy versus, say, a $50 natural service pregnancy. So yeah, you do spend 20 more extra dollars, but if you got the benefit of 80% of your calves coming in the first 30 days, plus you got a lot better genetics, and you keep heifers back out of those to make better cows, and you stack it generationally, then that $20 is pretty cheap, and you'll get your investment back easily on doing timed AI.
Yeah, and compiling on that, if you're at that amount of cows where you think about you have too many for one bull, and you're getting to the point where you need to purchase a second bull to cover those females, going in and doing a round of AI can help limit that to where you only do need one bull. So there's benefit to being able to reduce your bull power and the amount of bulls that you have to keep year round.
What about some other questions, Courtney? Any other directions we need to go with this discussion?
You want to do one more? What time are we supposed to get done? Is it 6:30?
No, what time? Yeah. Hour and a half. Oh, yeah. Oh, so we go till 7 usually. We don't have to go till 7.
Okay. But can you talk about average age of bull for breeding and heifers?
Yeah. So on bulls, that so if you're talking about buying bulls, you're probably going to be buying an 18-month-old bull. It used to be when I first, so I've been doing this stuff for 20 some odd years now, I guess, but it used to be that we'd buy 2-year-old bulls. It just everybody was buying a 24-month-old or 2-year-old bull, and that was great. You could use them with 25 cows or so. Anymore though, it costs so much to keep and develop a bull that seed stock breeders, is kind of, the market has backed itself up to where we buy more younger bulls, so 18-month-old bulls, sometimes even 15, 16-month-old bulls, because that's, you can look at it a couple of different ways, but, most commercial breeders didn't want to pay what it cost to develop a bull to 2 years old, and seed stock breeders couldn't keep them to 2 years old and sell them for what they'd be worth as a 15, 16-month-old bull. So now they sell them a little bit earlier. So that's usually about the age you're going to get a bull to start breeding, is be about 18 months old. And they should be through puberty there, but that's why that first breeding soundness exam is important in those. And we won't go into all the specifics of breeding soundness exam tonight. That's, that'd be good for you if you're brand new. I'd encourage you to keep looking at our educational programming for times that we go in more in depth on BSEs. But that basically is evaluating the bull to make sure he is going to give you every opportunity to get cows pregnant. So part of it is a physical examination. A big part of it is semen evaluation as well. So if an 18-month-old bull is passed a breeding soundness exam, and it's a real theriogenology kind of based breeding, and when I say that, I mean a veterinarian that is theriogenology board certified doing your breeding soundness exam, not just kind of like take a sample. Okay, I see something swimming, he's good. That's not a real BSE. But a veterinarian that's trained to do a real BSE, if that bull has passed it, then that means that that he's going to at least give you the opportunity, if your cows are in the right place, to get those cows settled. One caveat to that, and I didn't mean to talk about BSEs this long, but I will say that the one thing they can't check in that situation is libido. There's just not a good measure, a single point in time measure for libido, or the bull's willingness to get out and find cows that are in heat and service those cows. So you need to, even if you buy a bull with a good breeding status exam, you still need to watch him to make sure he's breeding cows. Okay, and just for a couple of weeks after you turn him out, just go by the cows and watch and make sure he's checking and finding them and getting them serviced. On the heifer side, so the original question, I think, after I've been talking a while now, is that what age are cows, are bulls and heifers, sound to breed. So that covers the bull, hopefully. But on heifers, it's like anything else, it's governed by physiology and economics. So we shoot and plan for our heifers to breed as around 14 months old. And that means that they'll calve for the first time as a 2-year-old. And the economic part of that is, if you wait later, it's easier to get a heifer bred if she's older, and it's easier to get her rebred if she calves older. Problem is, if you wait until she's like 18 months old to breed, like if you skip you roll her to a opposite season and breed her when she's older and she calves older, that means that you essentially lose a calf over her lifetime productivity. And there's no way to make up for that economically. She's just going to be, and it takes a lot longer to pay for her even. So your break even, your lifetime economic potential for that cow, you just start too far back to make her productive and economically beneficial cow to your herd. So we shoot for a cow calving or a heifer calving the first time as a 2-year-old. And to do that, that's breeding her about 14 months old. And to get that done, to make sure she's gone through puberty and she can settle early in that first breeding season, we kind of use just a place to start anyway. A general rule of thumb is that she needs to weigh about 65% of what you'd expect her to weigh as a mature cow. Or the other easier way to say that is a 14-month-old heifer that's about 800 pounds is about what we're shooting for most continent or British and continental type breeds and mature cows. You're usually shooting for breeding a 14-month-old heifer that's about an 8 weight. Now, most of you probably are getting well beyond that by that age, but we need to at least get there just to make sure they've gone through puberty and that their body is telling their brain, again, what Courtney talked about, the hypothalamus and the pituitary, their body needs to send cues to those areas of the brain and just under the brain to say, okay, it's time to go ahead and start cycling, get an opportunity to get pregnant because you're old enough and big enough now to support that. Okay. Other questions, Courtney, did you see on here something else topic wise?
Not really any pressing ones, which next week we have the panel discussion. So we're about 15 minutes early. If you want to end now, have a shorter session. And then if there's any lingering questions or you come up with something between now and next week, the panel discussion next week is your time to ask any of the speakers that are able to come on.
Yeah, let me say that I think Courtney and I both put our emails in the chat box. So as we're wrapping up here, I'd encourage everybody to grab those emails and shoot us emails before we have that panel discussion so we can go in there with an idea of what we need to cover. You know, everybody's still on here, I think it looks like, and see, I've been through this entire series of webinars, and you know, for that panel discussion to be as productive as we can, we'd like to really get at what is the main points that you want us to cover again. So most of the speakers that we've had through this series will be on that panel discussion. So if you go back and think about the things that in the previous sessions that you would like to have learned more about or that you've researched more since then and would like to ask more questions, that's going to be a great opportunity for you to send those in ahead of time so we can kind of start out by going around and talking about those while y'all are typing the other questions in the Q&A box at that time. for our last session next week. So grab those emails and send us your thoughts and what you'd like to hear us talk about it as we kind of rehash some of the things that we covered in our individual sessions. Other than that, just I see a couple here. A question about when you're synchronizing a cow, does their natural heat cycle come into play? Those protocols are designed to accommodate that. So if you start at any random one point in time in a group of cows, they're going to be all over the board. And that was a question that came in earlier about, well, I can't remember exactly what it was now, but basically those protocols are designed to accommodate for where any random cow might be at any given time in their cycle. Oh, I remember what it was that somebody asked, do cows naturally group up in their estrus cycles? And we don't see that as much as you'd see in other species, primates and humans, naturally sync up whenever they're housed in the same place. But you don't really see that in cattle like you do in others. So there'll be a pretty big spread of heat cycles, and they don't group up as much unless we do that for them with the tools that we have. So those protocols are made to accommodate for that. Another question here. If you got all your heifers calving at the same time, they've never calved before, that you do have to kind of watch about heifers that don't really take their calf as a experienced cow would be, and taking other calves. And so you kind of have to watch about that and help intervene when you need to. It's a question about, I'm just randomly taking a couple of these to make sure everybody gets our emails, but when you're breeding a 14-month-old heifer, as her size is concerned, I'll just reiterate that what I said there was that a 14-month-old heifer at 65% of what we expect her to be as a mature cow. So definitely size is a concern, but it's more for puberty. If you've got cows that are heifers that are small enough that you're concerned about calving difficulty, then that's a management and selection issue that you'd want to take care of. You can do that through pelvic measure. So there's a tool that you can actually measure the inside of their pelvis, so pelvic area measure. We would, if we're doing a full kind of a discussion on heifer development, we'd talk about things like that, but that can be something that you need to manage for. But I would rather select for that than to try to breed them when they're older if you're worried about making money. Again, that's what we predicate all of our discussions here on commercial cattle as a business, as a economic concern. So if you're in it, for sunshine and exercise, that might be a different, you might make different decisions, but for making money, then you need to select for heifers that are big enough to accommodate calving for the first time as a 2-year-old. I think there's some questions in here, talking about sex order, semen, and timing. We breed a little bit later. I think it would be great to save some of those for the panel discussion. I don't want to end up going over since we've done pretty good on most of the others. I don't want to start getting into too much different now and go over our time. But those are, we've got all these questions that have been asked in the previous. We'll use some of those to guide our discussion, but I really would encourage you to let us know too what you'd like us to talk more about in the panel discussion. So instead of running the risk of me talking for another 10 minutes, like I can do, Courtney, we'll just go ahead and call that good and reiterate that we'll have some time to go with more in depth in these in the panel discussion. And listen, just because you didn't get a question answered this evening doesn't mean that's the end of it, because that's why we're here, is to answer questions. And so we'd encourage you to contact your county agent, and they can likely help you with most all these questions. If they can't, then that's why they have us in the departments as specialists to kind of back them up on areas that they may not be as well trained in or experienced in. So if your county agent can't answer it, we can sure help with that. And you're always welcome to reach out directly to us if you have a specific question about one of these topic areas. So Courtney, with that, then I think we'll call it good and appreciate everybody's attentiveness on this whole series and look forward to wrapping it up well next week.
Awesome. Yep. And whenever I end this, you should get the survey. If you don't, you'll get it tomorrow night about 5 p.m. Through an email.
And I saw that there was a question in the chat about somebody didn't get a survey for the first one. Just let us know.
Just email me or your agent.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Courtney, great job. Appreciate it.